That way, That way, if I forget to start recording later, I can. I don't know what I'm talking about. When we last left off, Valentine was meeting with a man, uh, a black man, perhaps the black man, who is giving him something known as red uranium, a component for making what is presumably a bomb, and he is supposedly acting upon the orders of Faction Paradox. Now, speaking of Faction Paradox, Tiffany Corta appears to be in their employ. Tiffany Corta is a pop idol of some description, or perhaps a kind of in-between pop idol, something between metal and pop culture. Not metal, but goth culture, I suppose. She wears leather, she's cool. Just cool enough. There is an Angela. Tiffany Corta. She has just fled her hotel room where her executive has told her to stay, in order to find a woman who can read your aura, so to speak. Meanwhile, Angela is performing a ritual, supposedly to get the attention of the Archons of Faction Paradox. Her ritual involves painting the same symbol, or several different symbols, at specific points across the city. She's doing this with her friend Horror. Horror's name is just unambiguously Horror. I say unambiguously. It's clearly a nickname, but she doesn't know where she got it from. Now, if you'll notice, all three of our protagonists, four I suppose, they all in some way line up with Faction Paradox. They all in some way are attempting to make contact with or work for Faction Paradox. But will the real Faction Paradox please stand up? Anyways. We are now on part 2. We did part 0 and part 1. Now we're on part 2. Two, time travel. 2.00, making the bomb. This has been said before, but constructing a nuclear device isn't difficult. Even to say that is to say something fundamentally worthless. Of course it's not difficult. Of course it doesn't matter how easily available the information is. All that matters, all that's hard, is getting hold of the raw materials. And if you've got over 1,100 pounds of uranium-235, and if you know how to work a soldering iron and how to set up a timer on a VCR, then you can build a bomb. Anywhere, anytime. But uranium-235, the philosopher's stone of modern alchemy, so precious that any attempt to manufacture it would cripple most countries, unless those countries happen to have a near totalitarian control of their people's resources, or enough built-in terror to justify an arms race. Which is why no corporate concern has ever been tempted to use nuclear fission to change the conditions of the international markets. And oh, it'd be so easy otherwise. This is how it's done. Nuclear fission occurs when a certain amount of uranium, the critical or supercritical mass, is brought into a small enough space. All nuclear devices, professional or otherwise, involve the uranium being split into two halves. The usual chemical rule applies. Nothing happens until the two primal elements are fused together in the crucible. Charmingly, 400 years ago, they called this elemental marriage. Military-built bombs even shape the two halves like into a bolt and a hole. The two halves are placed a short distance apart inside whatever you want to use as a bomb casing, facing each other because you're bound to feel as if that matters. and you'll probably end up thinking about two old mystic symbols, or of two snakes eating each other's tails, or even one snake eating its own tail, given both halves are the same element. The important thing is that surrounding the uranium, on either side of the bomb casing, is a quantity of conventional explosive. The finishing touches, a couple of detonator caps placed in the explosive. The caps are wired to either a remote control device or a timer mechanism. You might need someone with real electrical skill to do this, but if you don't have the time to learn and don't trust anyone else, there's also the suicide option. You can try setting the explosive off manually. Try shooting it. Whatever the method, the blast joins the two halves of the U-235 into a single critical mass, and the resulting explosion is capable of killing thousands. 300,000 men, women, and children. Because symbolically speaking, you must never forget the children. We're just 2 days' work at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and bear in mind, the world was a smaller place then. These days, most large-scale criminal concerns are capable of supplying some form of nuclear material, but as with red mercury, this can be unpredictable. Many of those who want to illicitly obtain weapon-grade matter want to do so purely for the sake of going nuclear, which is why any form of uranium, 235 or otherwise, has a market value. It's what faction cultists would call a fetish. The supposed existence of the dirty bomb, designed to spread radiation sickness in civilian populations rather than cause a real-life, honest-to-God nuclear explosion, is generally assumed to be a result of zealots and terrorists wanting a cheap and easy way to create havoc, even though their contacts can't supply them with the ingredients of a complete bomb. Of course it isn't. It's the inevitable result of an underground culture which just wants that one brief smack of the totem atomic. To be able to say, we've called on the same powers as you, military-industrial bastards, and look how scared you are now. So the lesson's simple. Any nuclear material that might be found on the black market is likely, if not guaranteed, to be a damn sight less impressive than U-235. Even if the weapons-grade material has leaked out to some fallen empire somewhere, anyone who gets their hands on it will be more likely to sell it where the money is, to governments rather than private concerns. If any material ends up at a street level, its quantities are likely to be ritualistic as much as explosive. As if that isn't enough to do any damage. 2.01. The Hall. Beyond the curtains in the waiting room, there must be a door, although no wall or door frame becomes visible as you pass through it. The area in the other side is quite specifically another room, vast and self-contained, and appalling, its ceiling higher, bewilderingly higher. In that room you've just left behind. An optical illusion, surely? A hallway as much as a chamber. The last mile before Miss Ruth's inner sanctum. The walls are in black satin, but they're lined with, you could say, bookshelves, although books were never intended to be put to rest here. Each block of shelves must be at least twice as tall as, to pick a random example, an Angela. But it's no use using exact measures, because the place renders all numbers equally useless. The shelves are lined with videotapes. That doesn't sound bad at all, does it? You think of video shops, or libraries at the very least. You think of a choice of 1,000 different movies, all with brightly colored spines, like a collection of chocolate wrappers pinned to the wall. It's not like that. It's not like that at all. They're not in cases. And they're not marked, not with a single label or a single letter. Blocks of black plastic, taller than giants and wider than an Angela's arms. The cassettes squeeze next to each other on the shelves, with nothing to tell apart the thousands, tens thousands, hundreds of thousands that must be here. Carelessly, Some of them protrude further from the shelves than others, like beetles trying to crawl over each other to be the nearest to the food supply. There's a reason that videotapes get dressed in colored packaging. There's an atavistic fear that human beings suffer when they're faced with something black and insect-like and with no human features. One cassette, and it's barely noticeable. A dozen, all piled on top of each other, and you start to find yourself thinking, colony. 100,000 or 200,000 or more, it changes things. The sheer volume of them makes it hard to judge scale, because you're in their world now, and everything has to be measured in tape instead of organic human ideals like feet. There's the factory smell of plastic, of chemically bonded polymers in magnetic film. The videotape leaves sour air in the same way that ants leave formic acid. So many cassettes, making an Angela want to scream and run along the hallway, pushing them all back so they don't seem to be crawling out of the shelves. Imagine being buried under them, the cockroach-like ka-chuck, 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 as they fall on top of you. The sound of your fingernails scraping against the plastic. I fucking hate this place, says Horror. She tries to say it quietly, so that Jacqueline doesn't hear it. It's a wasted effort, since every slightest noise here echoes off the hard, shiny shells of the tapes. But Jacqueline, fortunately, is trained not to respond. She just keeps leading them towards the end of the hallway. 2.02. The Trick. The second time an Angela asked Jacqueline about being able to read videotape, she pushed the point and managed to get out half a conversation. "No, really," she said. "How do you do that? Is it magnets or something?" A fair guess. Images are stored on videotape as patterns of magnetism. It's feasible, almost feasible, that if someone spent their life surrounded by VCR, then they'd be sensitive enough to... well, you get the idea. It's not as if Jacqueline had an answer much more comprehensive than discipline. "Yeah, but what kind of discipline?" "It's quite simple," said Jacqueline, although the way she said... "It's quite simple," said Jacqueline, although she said it in a way that made it sound almost painful. A way that said, "Miss Ruth has beaten me every day for the last year in order to make me understand that it's simple, and there are scars on my back and my backside, and it hurts to even think of it, but I'm happy to have made this sacrifice." "Yes?" Angela prompted. "You have to leave the pit behind," Jacqueline told her. "You mean the real world?" "It's not real," snapped Jacqueline, obviously feeling Angela dig her nails into the whip scars. 2.03. All ye who enter. But now Jacqueline stands at the end of the great hallway, beyond the breeding, hatching colonies of cassettes, and prepares to open the curtains there. And it's that an Angela realizes the delicate, shiny satin is supposed to mirror the magnetic tape inside the cassettes, giving the collection a sense of context, like the insects of a kind of hive. There's another thing an Angela always wonders at this stage. She wonders if Miss Ruth is even capable of passing this point, of passing through the great hall herself. Here in the tower she guards the truth, safe from the pit, and it's known she can see the magnetic shadows of several cassettes at once, perhaps all the cassettes at once. There are thousands of tapes inside the sanctum itself, it's true, but it seems at least feasible that she might step out into the hallway whenever she wants to see the truth head-on, to see the collection in a single glance, to see all the worlds stored inside all the beetle shells. And Angela has heard that Miss Ruth can receive every television station in the world here inside the tower, all those cables and satellite feeds leading here into the heart of the edifice. What they do, if an Angela understands the process correctly, is refine the truth. They take the raw material of the abyss of hallucinations, the news stories, the vox pops, and the dramas, real or otherwise, and strip away the cells, the grandfather's axes, the bonds of pure matter that stop the human brain from understanding things in their entirety. Miss Ruth sees all the angles, all the interpretations, and she sees them all simultaneously. If she ever stepped outside the tower, then she'd only see a fraction of the truth, and although her own and through her own two eyes, assuming she only has two. The curtains snap open, Jacqueline pulling them apart with one swift, clean robotic motion. The TV noise floods out into the hallway at full volume, and the flickering, monochrome light makes an Angela in horror squint, then non-squint, then squint, then not squint in rapid succession. Lo! Enter the presence of the Great Mother. .04 Valentine was born in a city of the future. Meaning he was born in a model of the city of the future. This is how the story is told. 22 years ago, there was a traveling exposition which toured on the country, promising to give children a glimpse of the world of tomorrow, because children are impatient and can't wait that long. There were props, and lots of them. There were gadgets the size of rocket engines, which the organizers assured the slack-jawed and nose-picking audience would one day be cheaper and available to the general public. There were artists' representations of technologies children might expect to use when they got older, a prospect of which many of them found exciting, not realizing the older part would take the excitement away. The exhibition was sponsored by a leading snack food company, which is to say that for the most part of the exposition, which is to say that for a most part the exposition was an advert for that company, and the interactive monitor screens showed Rocket Age remixes of the company's television campaigns. Behold, raccoons in space. Ad men and people conditioners were more obvious in those days. The centerpiece was the truly enormous City of the Future exhibit, made up of model buildings created by children from all over the nation, each one of whom received a special commemorative chocolate coin. The twist was that to receive this short-lived prize, they had to build every structure in company colors, including gold being the color of the foil wrapper on the company's leading product. It was, as you may have guessed, in the hall of the City of the Future that Valentine's mother began to suffer the contractions. She could so easily have lain down on the floor, while the exhibition attendants hurried to seal off the area, but some bright spark must have seen one too many hospital dramas in which pregnant women always recline on furnishings just below eye level and started clearing a space on the great war room-style table that supported the city. At first, the golden skyscrapers and minarets and catwalks were moved quite carefully, so as not to disturb the urban planning of the future. But as Valentine's mother began to howl louder and louder, the structures were swept away by the armful. Once she was enthroned in the middle of the city, and the waters broke and her body began to buckle, the future carnage got worse. The first thing Valentine must have seen was a wasteland in tinfoil. Poor kid, born into destruction, and more importantly, into a world of advertising. 2.05 NB. This is how the story's told, but you'd have to agree that certain details are suspect. For one thing, it's a description of a pregnancy which leaves the mother completely oblivious until mere minutes before the child makes its debut, which is a hell of a short labor, and Valentine's assertion that he was premature doesn't help. You might also ask why his mother was present at the exhibition anyways, since it was aimed at the 7 to 12 demographic, and Valentine was an only child. But this is the way the story was told to him, and this is the way he tells it, and nativity legends are always awkward. 2.06 Familiarity. It's no good. It doesn't matter what kind of protective casing's involved. If somebody puts any quantity of nuclear material in front of you, you're going to want to back away, to push yourself as far into your seat as you can go. The human fear of poison is as deep-rooted as fear ever gets. You could argue that only people of the black man's creed, seeing the world in all its snake-bitten glory, know how to explore that. The bright red uranium container is still resting on the floor of the car between the man's couch and Valentine. Between the man's couch and Valentine's. Each slow thump of the sound system shakes, and it makes the metal cap vibrate, so every 2 seconds, the time between each thump of the bass by Valentine's reckoning, but admittedly time is now slowing down for him, and the lizard smoke doesn't help. There's a moment of blissfully pure terror as Valentine waits for the canister to tear itself open. The black man keeps smiling. He's not twitching a muscle, and by now Valentine's absolutely convinced that he's enjoying this. He's certainly in no hurry to conclude the business transaction. No. It's no good. Valentine has to speak, just to let something out of his body. Is that secure? He asks, pointing at the canister, but only very briefly, in case it makes his finger drop off. He tries to make the question sound concerned and professional, as if he were an expert on these matters. "It's secure," says the black man. "You're sure? Only some of these materials, it could be unstable." "You want to make sure?" No, I don't want to go anywhere near the fucking thing." "What do you mean, make sure?" "You could look." Yes, he really should have seen that coming. "It's not safe," Valentine says. "Not in these conditions. Not here." He's fairly sure that the man knows this, because even he knows it. "You're gonna be using it," the black man says, as if he were a normal human being, and he'd shrug nonchalantly at this point. "Thought you might want to get to know it. Make sure it's what you want." Get to know it? The black man's talking as if it's a person. No, wait. Valentine isn't sure about this. But isn't that the way the witch cults talk about elements and substances and whatever you call them? Like they've got personalities of their own. Like every element's a definite presence. God, getting to know uranium. Suddenly Valentine can't help but think of his destiny as a kind of appalling arranged marriage. He starts shaking his head. "You need special clothes," he says. This much is true. "There's radiation." "You got your ambulance clothes." "What?" "Got your ambulance clothes." Valentine's head just can't stop shaking. He tugs at the hem of his overalls, proving how flimsy they are. "No, this isn't enough. This won't help. Not if there's radiation." This time the black man doesn't reply. He just keeps staring through those half-closed eyes. "Really?" Valentine adds. .07 The non-space. "Whew," says Horror, eventually, and Angela imagines her blinking like one of the van's broken indicator lights, trying to get her eyes into the rhythm of the place, but it's never going to happen. There's a kind of light you can only get from old movie footage. No, specifically, there's a kind of light you can only get from the combination of old movie footage and videotape. Black and white images shine onto the screen at 24 frames per second, badly spliced and riddled with great black holes, with the contrast so badly out of whack that whole swaths of the picture are taken up by total black or blinding white. The videotape, onto which the film's been transcribed, skips ahead at 25 frames every second, creating dark, split-second gulfs in the streams of images, blanking out the light whenever it can't get quite a grip on the holes in the original film stock. No strobe light, no deliberately designed kind of flicker, could match this. Yet this is the way Miss Ruth's inner sanctum, her boudoir, is decorated. Flicker in its natural color. There are no walls, in the sense that anyone would conventionally recognize them. There's just the light, generated by a screen that's so large and so intense that it renders everything else, everything made in the pit, utterly intangible. This room is made of light, and the light goes on forever, except when everything turns into darkness, and there's simply no room at all. The noise is overwhelming. The amplified TV dialogue sound of a man arguing with a woman, the voices exceeding to the limits of bass and treble and turning into shrill, painful fuzz. It's just a room, and you'd never find your way out of it without the help of Jacqueline, who seems to teleport from space to space on Miss Ruth's command. But once again, it could be your eyes moving faster than your brain can follow. And Angela is sure that this room must have burned Miss Ruth's eyes out by now, if, as it seems, she lives, eats, and sleeps here. If, indeed, she has to do as things as banal as eating and sleeping, and hasn't already let the screen light burn away her more garish biological functions. If she's blind and her eyes have been slowly borne down to nothing in their sockets, then Angela knows it hardly matters. The light must rush into the woman's head through whatever empty holes she may have in her skull. 2.08. Shh. And Angela has already tried to start a conversation with Miss Ruth. The voice that came out of the flicker, that superimposed itself over the broken, scratchy, old soundtrack like a subtitle, was loaded with ice and irony and a kind of authority which never even considers the thought that it might be questioned. The voice said, As you obviously haven't noticed, I'm watching television. 2.09. Down to earth. Contrary to the beliefs of many, the aim of any executive is not to produce gods. Celebrities must, at all costs, be protected from the public, in order to ensure their bodies aren't damaged before such a thing might be beneficial. But it doesn't benefit anybody if the modern star becomes untouchable. The male consumer must feel disappointed, plus potentially excited, if told that a sexually primed female star is a lesbian, as if it makes the slightest bit of difference to him. Ideally, the public should believe in heaven on earth and see the pop personality as being a liaison with it. The word idol is almost aptly chosen, but not quite. It suggests an aspect of a god rather than a god in itself, which is perfectly correct. It also suggests something static and unresponsive, something carved out of stone, which is quite wrong. Older mythologies held that the gods would occasionally take an human form or an animal form, descending to earth in order to experience brief, bloody flashes of human experience. Urban European mythologies held that even emperors and kings occasionally did this, disguising themselves as beggars or cripples in order to see the everyday meanness and delight of their subjects. Obviously ridiculous. Emperors aren't democratic, and have no need to know the feeling of anyone but the closest to them. They have no reason to understand the mood of the culture in general, unlike more modern corporate entities, who have no need to know anything else. But that's just it. These are not quite gods. They make their will known through their interviews and videos recordings, but there's always the possibility one of them might be found walking the streets, ready to give her blessing to anyone who shows her kindness, ready to leave her footsteps in the ordinary world. I had that Tiffany quarter in the back of my cab once. 2.10. Ride. This is the first time that Tiffany has been aware of the existence of a taxi. She's been in them before. Taxis are, typically, the things which take her from the airport to the hotel, or from the hotel to the designer boutique, but before now a taxi has just been a buffer, a place where she has to wait, accompanied by at least 2 members of the executive, before the next location arrives out the window. Suddenly, on this particular night, she's realized that the taxi might actually be a thing in itself, not to mention the things she can see on the outside. She had to ask the driver whether it was possible to get closer to the things outside, and he showed her how to open the window, letting the night into the vehicle as the glass nervously slid down into the metal. Air that made it hard to breathe, just for a moment. The smell of a European restaurant, with its name marked out in a scribble signature of yellow light, supplying her with the suggestion of lumache and tortellini and beds of olive oil. Blasts of sounds, car engines and radio waves, and parties of sweating teenagers on a hot night. Tiffany is going somewhere of her own accord. There's a newspaper on the seat next to her, a copy of The Sun, and although it's not a paper she likes, for obvious reasons, it somehow gels with the garlic and oils that's working its way into the leather plastic seats. There's a picture of her on the front page. The letter promises she'll find more of herself on page 12. Tiffany isn't sure if it's worth opening the paper, and anyways, she's not certain whether her uber self will get bigger if she concentrates on her own image. It's obvious, isn't it, that she has other things on her mind? She might not understand the layout of this town, but she has her instincts and the vague memory of an address, and she knows where she's got to be, what the next scene change is. Let's not say she's breaking any rules by sneaking away like this. Tiffany can go where she wants, even if the executive makes disappearing faces behind its disapproving Tiffany can go where she wants, even if the executive makes disapproving faces behind its disapproving masks. But the fewer people who see her tonight, the safer she'll feel. 2.11. A certain professional rivalry. Valentine has established 3 things. 1. The yellow canister contains half a critical mass of red uranium. 2. The other half isn't in the car, which seems reasonable, because nobody wants to drive around with enough nuclear material to risk Armageddon in a traffic accident. 3. The black man must be testing him. Nobody would be stupid enough to open the container in the back of a car, even a limo, if they had any idea what was in it. And the black man must know, or why would he be selling it? The man's silent now, rooting himself into his couch again, waiting for Valentine to make the next move. More than once in the last few minutes, Valentine's had to remind himself that he really is here to buy red uranium for illegal purposes, and that he really isn't faking it, which is what his instincts are still telling him. So he says, Where did it come from? Of course, there's no reply from behind the great white smile. We need to know the source, Valentine lies, almost as an apology. You don't ask, says the man. Did it come from a ship? Ha! The man's face actually flickers, and not just because of the candlelight. Genuine puzzlement. A ship of war, Valentine explains. Not such an unreasonable question. Though the technology of the ships remains obscure, surely there must be nuclear power involved? Hard to imagine what these great, unseen behemoths run on if it's not nuclear power. Since red uranium seems to have shown up in a town like this, it's only after the start of the war. It makes sense for the material to have been collected from a war site, or it almost makes sense. The man goes as far to turn his head, as if Valentine's no longer worth his attention. His eyes dreamily fix themselves on whatever might be happening to be outside. War's not my business, he says. This is now. thinks Valentine. You wanna know things? Go to Miss Ruth, the man continues. This is just business. Go to Miss Ruth, says the man. Valentine decides not to ask. Miss Ruth sounds like a brothel owner to him. Just wanted to check, said Valentine, still trying to sound like a professional buyer. It's important that we know the, pedigree? No, that's not the word. Oh, never mind. Type of material. We have to be sure. It's now that the black man turns to look at him again, but this time it's a real, deliberate kind of looking, not just a vague and drug-muddied gaze. You really want to be sure? He says. Boom, chat, boom, chat, says the sound system. 2.12. To explain. Valentine doesn't know Miss Ruth, and in Angela's never met the black man, so none of the characters moving into position across the face of the town can compare notes. But just for the record, the black man and Miss Ruth have a complicated relationship. The two of them have, obviously, never met. Miss Ruth has never been known to leave her place of residence, while the man can only exist at a street level and, frankly, has no reason to drop in on a mad old woman. Most people, for want of a better evidence, think of her as being old. Who never comes any closer to touching the bizongu than seeing the hidden ghosts in Japanese TV advertisements. They seem to have so little in common, other than the fact that they're both figures of fascination for the town's subcultures and sub-subcultures and wannabe sub-subcultures. Yet, strangely, they've heard of each other, and occasionally even seem netted by each other's presence. The black man will hint, rather unnecessarily, that if she ever attracts too many potential customers off the streets, then he'll cut out her womb, a threat which gets right to the core of his own native ritual process, or, at the very least, tells you something about the way it's seen by men. In turn, Miss Ruth will describe the black man as an animal wallowing in the pit's filth, which is, admittedly, what she says about almost everyone. They have to be aware of each other. They're the only local remnants of a tradition that's as old as language, literally as old, to the very second. The fact that one of them uses the signs of the witch cults out of pragmatism. The fact that one of them only uses the signs of witch cults out of pragmatism, and that the other has no interest in any part of the past that isn't recorded on magnetic tape, is of no consequence of the... Oh gosh. The fact that one of them only uses the signs of the witch cults out of pragmatism, and that the other has no interest in any part of the past that isn't recorded on magnetic tape, is of no consequence at all. Before the war, before faction paradox, they were here, just where they've always been. 2.13. The plural of medium is media. Miss Ruth is definitely seated. This can be considered to be her one concession to the purely corporeal, the fact that she presumably has an arse which needs to be frested somewhere. Then again, her profile's impossible to make out, even when her silhouette's framed against the blazing white of the screen-stroke room. One moving shadow on the screen, and the eye leaps to follow. The eye retains the image of that actor, or just a little bit of him, so when your attention turns back to Miss Ruth, you'll find that all those tiny details have become superimposed. She looks like everybody who's ever been captured on film or on videotape. Her outline seems to shift endlessly, and change different with every flash and every focus, and even her seat of power is mutable. It may be a throne, or a barber stool, it depends on the context. Oddly enough, horror seems to quite like it here, which is the only reason she even agrees to come to the tower block, even though she has no need of oracular advice from anyone and can't stand the Hall of Beetles. And Angela suspects the room gives her a buzz, which is doubly odd, as it just freaks out every other human being whoever gets this far. Horror apparently doesn't mind the feeling that she suddenly exists in a medium other than flesh. And Angela may have a problem with the idea of totem animals, as Horror has already suggested, but it's easy to believe that by now Horror is a totem animal in her own right. As far as can be ascertained, Miss Ruth is seated with her back to an Angela. As the only fixed point in the sanctum, she has a weight, which defies mass. She's a huge, fat, immobile Great Mother, the queen of all the insect cassettes, bloated to bursting point by the signals around her. Here at the core of the world, she's mater media. There's a rattling whenever she lifts a hand, or even turns her head a little, and Angela imagines her covered in the same beetle shells as the rest of the collection. 2.14. The Headless Zoo. Oh yes, and Angela's problem, or problems, with totem animals. On a gut level, the idea seems so sound. As a ritualist, she shouldn't find it hard to believe that somewhere, somehow, there might be an animal with her name on it. That somewhere, somehow, there's a complex bundle of mobile DNA which is connected to her in a deeply, profoundly and moving way, except for two things. One, she can't explain why this should be true. Being a child of the post-Planet of the Apes generation, she's always known people are animals too, and certainly not the chosen ones of heaven, so she can't rationally explain why a human being should be celestially linked to a deer when, for example, there's indicating a deer might be linked to a dung beetle, or a dung beetle might be linked to a cuttlefish. By the same token, werewolf movies don't make a lot of sense to her. Men can turn into wolves, as it seems, almost normal. What? Oh, men can turn into wolves, and it seems almost normal, but starlings never ever turn into rabbits. 2. Ah yes, wolves. Without exception, everyone she's known who has claimed to have a totem animal has claimed to be linked to a creature they've never met. Pale boys from the inner city claim to be wolves. Girls who live in high-rise tower blocks claim to be eagles. People who spend most of their lives in open plan offices and underground tunnels claim to share in heritage of the Great Bear. A strange totem to have, an animal which would never, ever be able to exist in your home environment, and which you've only ever seen as a blown-up image on a documentary channel. And Angela continues to search for the animal which she feels an unspoken bond. She briefly toyed with the idea it might be a frozen chicken, since symbolically, to someone who lives in a production line world, this isn't in any way the same thing as a real chicken. And it helps that most tribal societies don't hold grudges against people who eat their own totems. In fact, every now and then, you'll find a tribe that positively encourages this bizarre form of self-cannibalism. Which leads her to the possibility of totem animals that only exist as projections, as ideals, cartoon totem animals which have no existence other than part of a logo or on a supermarket meat product in a certain supermarket. Come, eat of our flesh, they seem to say. Consume us and become whole. And by the way, oink. 2.15. Miss Cortez and the Mosquito. When she was too young to know better, Tiffany had a totem animal of a kind. Her totem animal was a mosquito. It was an unusual choice, perhaps, but since Tiffany was raised in a city where mosquito nests were an everyday sight, it at least conforms to Angela's no posturing and relevant animals only rules. As with Tiffany's later stage performances, there may have even been a deliberate element of danger to it. The days when her ancestors died of mosquito bites were long gone, but the bugs still had a reputation, and the way Tiffany's mother would run screaming when one of them would land on one of the big woman's freckled arms and try to puncture the skin. Since the start of the war, things have changed in Little Cuba. People can now die of malaria again, just like in the old times. It's what happens when the rules change. Tiffany never thought of the insect as a totem. She thought of it more as an kind of imaginary friend, although in substance it wasn't imaginary, only in the way that she connected up all the world's mosquitoes to make one single benevolent guardian animal. When a mosquito landed on her and lovingly tried to nestle under her skin, it was the mosquito. Even if her mother squashed it out of existence, it still came back. One mosquito, in that same way that, in her eyes, there's now one town, one hotel, and one taxi. All mosquitoes are the same anyway, and she knows for a fact that an exact copy of something is the thing, so is that so unreasonable? 2.16. No coverage. Tiffany asks the driver if he can turn the radio on, getting disappointed to discover there's no radio in this cab. The driver tells her they're nearly there anyway. Normally, Tiffany's permanently exposed to a signal of some kind. In the company of Father Danzale or Mother Nod, she'll have the television on in the background, with the sound turned down to a low murmur. She sleeps with the radio on, as she did when she was a child, but here in the taxi, only the background noise is the noise of a town, and it doesn't come down in a wire. As it doesn't come down in a wire, she isn't sure if she trusts it. Things are getting ominous for Tiffany. Her destination's calling her. She knows that. But now she realizes, for the first time, really, that she's going there alone, which is a major step for someone who doesn't feel she's got much of an identity left, at least not there in this little bundle of flesh and bone. This it? This it? Asks the driver, and the vehicle pulls into the forecourt of the darkest place Tiffany's ever seen. Oh boy. Faction writing in general, and this is for all the faction books out there, the language is so obfuscatingly expressive. I'm doing my best to follow along here, but it's a bit of a problem. I will say I did take a big hit before this, so that could also be what's messing me up. But who doesn't love to get high and read books? That's actually not true. I don't like to read books when I'm high, because then I forget what I read 2 pages ago. Comic books. Getting high and reading comic books is good. Reading aloud's alright, because then I can use the words to ground me. I'm going to take a moment here to drink some tea. We're in between chapters. In between chapters is a comfortable place to stop and rest for a moment. And think about the night. No, I don't have anything to say about the night. We could, you know what we could do? We could do a faction. Well, you know what? We'll do that at the end. We'll pull up the Book of the War, and I'll do a faction fact. Faction fact. I tried to make an image for the faction paradox thing to show up, but no luck. I made it wrong, I should say. No, not no luck. Forgot to make it a transparent PNG. Oh, this is thrilling content. Sorry, talking about things I failed to make. What I like about Faction Paradox, though, is because it's so expressive, it feels very raw and powerful. This is easily the strongest of the faction books in terms of its expression of what the tone of a faction story is meant to be. Whether it's the best faction book is probably a matter of some debate among the fans, since the faction books tend to mean very different things to different people. Is this in cardioid mode? This isn't even in cardioid mode. I've been talking and letting all the sound just bleed in. Foolish.
How many books are there in total?
In total? That's an excellent question. Lucas would know the answer, but actually he might be awake. You know, I'm just going to look it up. I'm going to look it up because I think that's better content.
I was going to say, you have the audiobooks. But how many of
The audio
those
dramas, yes.
or how many of those are individual audio dramas?
So,
not
so
books?
the audio dramas are their own long story.
Oh God! But there are audiobooks of the books.
No,
Oh, okay.
no. You're overestimating it. No. The audio dramas. No, the audio dramas are their own thing, their own storyline, and they're broken up into two halves as well. There's Magic Bullet, and there's there was BBV, and then there's Magic Bullet, and then there was no, BBV. No, that sounds right. BBV and then Magic Bullet. The BBV stuff was the very early stuff, and it's kind of rough. And then the Magic Bullet was the storyline in which they bought the rights for Sutek the Destroyer and the Assyrian court to have them face off. And it was very good. They upped the production value, and I thoroughly enjoy Sutek. I have the signed CD of Ozymandias, which is a very good section of that. But the first half is about the fall of the 11-Day Empire, which is where the faction lives. They live. It's this fun little what do you call it? There was a point in human history where the government was transitioning over from one calendar to a new calendar, or they were catching up some days or something like that, just to make sure that calendars were more in sync. Something along those lines. But it meant that there would be 11 days cut out of the calendar. And people thought that this meant, oh my God, the day I die is written in a book by God. And so...
is this real?
This is real. If those 11 days are taken away from me, those are 11 days less that I have to live. And they were like, what's going to happen? What's going to happen with these 11 days? And everyone was like, no, guys, it's not literally taking 11 days away. We're just changing the calendar around.
Yeah.
But
you're not losing it, but they found a way to make it sound like it's a bad thing.
In their own minds, yeah.
Yeah.
Because they think there's a day that they're going to die. There's a
day
specific day that they are going to die, that they are destined to die
Based on
by
the
God's
way the
will.
calendar is right this second.
No.
That calendar
It's not
changes.
based on the calendar. Like they didn't understand the concept of changing over to a new calendar because they weren't subjugated or whatever. Anyways, but the point is that, well, they're about to change over to this calendar and take those 11 days, and Faction Paradox shows up and says, we'll take those days, thank you very much. We'll take those 11 days of your empire, and we'll buy them from you. And they go,
Who do they
okay.
say that to? Just God?
What's that?
Who do they say that to?
The British government.
Oh.
They say we'll buy your 11 days, and so what they do is then they create a kind of copy of London at that time out of minutes and hours and days, and it's 11 days. It's 11 days of that empire, and it's just a shadow of the empire. Blood red sky, and all the buildings are extremely dark. It's not a real place. I don't want to say it's not a real place, but it's a construct. It's not. It's just a copy of London. But that's where the faction center of operations is. And in the first episode of the Faction Paradox audio dramas, it gets attacked by the Sontarans, no less. Spoilers. Because you have to remember, these were written back in I think it's the 90s, and so everything was dirt cheap.
No one gave a fuck about the Sontarans.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
Last time we saw them, they were like, potato or whatever.
Last time we saw them, they were attacking Gallifrey.
Before New Who.
Yes, before New Who. Faction Paradox. Now, Faction Paradox did appear in Doctor Who novels, but then became its own thing.
Would it be great if, as a surprise, in the 60th they mentioned it?
Here we are, novels. This does not look like it has been updated. Okay, so we have 1, 2, 3. Can you just tell me all of them? I'm gonna try that Google instead. How many? All right, Wikipedia. Maybe you'll be better. The Faction Paradox Wiki. Here we are. Da-da-da. Overview. Originally in a subplot in the Eighth Doctor Adventures, the war involved several characters and concepts evolved from the original Doctor Who setup in several cases. The Faction Paradox series, blah, blah, blah. The Paradox still features these groups, albeit with name changes for reasons both literary. Most of the groups and items mentioned are described from different perspectives, and legal. The faction and the enemy are Miles' creations, but other elements are not, thus the Great Houses are the Faction Paradox equivalents to the Doctor Who's Time Lords. Okay, yeah, we knew that. Here we are. Doctor Who BBC books. Faction Paradox BBV. Oh. Alright. Here we are. Faction Paradox Mad Norwegian Press. Faction Paradox series set in the same universe. These books also features characters from Doctor Who novels, including Chris Quedge and Compassion. Yay. The Book of the War. 1. This Town Will Never Let Us Go. 2. City of the Saved. 3. Warlords of Utopia. 4. Warring States. 5. Erasing Sherlock. 6. There was a Image comic series that got 2 issues. There's Newton's Sleep. That's 7. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. There appears to, I think there's more than that. I'm just gonna ask Lucas. He'll know. Lucas has almost all of them, and I've read barely any of them. But this town is very good. Lawrence Miles kicked the whole thing off, and he's the guy who we're adapting the play for, so I hope he's not listening to this. That would be embarrassing for me. Okay, I think I've moistened up enough. Time to continue. .17. Boom chat, qua boom chat. The music's faster than it was, although there didn't seem to be a point where one track ended and a new one started. The car is speeding up, too. Valentine's sure of it, even if the only way he can judge is by watching the little yellow streetlights get faster as they skid past the windows. Ergo, his heart beats also faster. G-force presses him into his seat. Well, no, not really. His back's to the driver, so logically the acceleration should be pushing him forward toward the nuclear materials container, but there's no way in God's name he's doing that. Faster music means the car shakes more. The cap of the container vibrates at least once a second. Valentine's trying not to stare at it, but staring at the black man staring at him is worse. And maybe it's the candle smoke in his throat, but he's not sure how he's going to be, but he's sure he's going to be sick any second now. Said you need to be sure, said the smile in the seat opposite. What? Said Valentine. Said you need to be sure, the man repeats. Don't want you saying it's not no good. Don't want you coming back and asking for your moolah back. I don't understand, says Valentine. Look, it's not stable. Uranium isn't stable. That's the point, all right. You've got to go slower. You ever used this stuff before? The man asks. doesn't have to raise his voice to cut in. "No," says Valentine as he tries to get faster. As the car gets faster, and he finds himself trying to become one with the animal hide under him. "Yes. No. I know what I'm doing." "It's not so bad," the man tells him. "You got to know how to treat it, that's all." "It doesn't work like that," says Valentine. "It doesn't work like that. You can't treat it. You can't touch it. It's not stable. It's poison. Radiation. That's all." Even as he says it, he realizes it's the wrong thing to say. He remembers a satellite TV documentary about snake cults, about preachers who test their faith with a cobra in each hand, who spent their lives finding salvation by letting venom into their bodies, one little speck at a time. He desperately tries to remember whether they had the same tradition in Africa. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because the man is leaning forward again, his bulk shifting, his arm reaching out, his face getting brighter as his cheek passes close to one of the candles. He's reaching for the container. Oh God, he's going to do it. Oh God, he's actually going to do it. "It's not so bad," says the black man. "Look." "Don't touch it," Valentine finds himself saying. The hand of the black man gripping the cap of the container, the smile hovering in the background. Valentine desperately wants to stop this, or be sick, or something. Anything to be more than just a creature who exists in between the gaps between the bass beats. This isn't how you get involved in the war. This has got nothing to do with the statement or faction paradox, or even, God help him, politics. This is living death in the back of a car. Those parts of his body controlled by Cause's pills start to twitch, ready for action, but he doesn't for the life of him know what action it might be, and right now, every option, grappling the black man, screaming and smashing one of the windows, and trying to climb into the non-poisonous air outside, seem equally ludicrous. "You want to be sure?" asks the black man, as he twists the cap, and the pfop of the seam becomes part of the percussion track. 218. Politics. The relationship between the war and more conventional, everyday powers is a complex one. Clearly no politician in the modern age can wholly avoid the subject of the war, especially since the majority of his or her potential supporters will have some degree of first-hand experience, even if that experience just involves witnessing the thunder flash of a rocket attack in the far distance and thinking how close it was. But at the same time, no policy on the war will ever do a politician any good. Politicians probably couldn't do a thing about it even if they tried. Even if every party became united in opposition to it, and even if the complete financial resources of every continent were brought to bear, no government can control a conflict this fundamental, any more than they can control the weather or the economy or the production of weapons. Some forces are other and more deep-rooted than any constitution, which leaves the average candidate with an obvious problem. People don't like the war, yet any politician who speaks against it will be judged a failure by definition. No promise he makes to curb it, or to keep it out of his particular province, can possibly be kept. The standard solution is to be generally sympathetic to those affected by the war, but always to speak of it as if it's sadly necessary, something which has been built into the foundations of society, and who knows, maybe it has. It's exactly the same approach that's favored by the pop stars, and make what you will of that. A good politician knows that no voter will ever spend too long analyzing the reasons for the war's existence, unless some enterprising journalist not only succeeds in uncovering the truth about the war's masters, but also finds the human angle which allow that truth to be accepted by the general public. In the 2 years since the war came to this part of the world, no journalist has managed this feat. It seems increasingly likely that the forces responsible for the conflict have no relation with the rest of humanity at all, which makes the human angle impossible to find by definition. 2.19. The moral dimension. In the sanctum, it's possible, just, to make out what Miss Ruth's actually watching. However terrible the contrast, however many all-devouring patches of black might open up in the videotape, human brains are good at linking picture A and picture C even when picture B isn't there. As a result, an Angela can make out the shadows of characters as they go through the motions of their narratives. Sometimes they seem to be behind her, sometimes they seem to be in front of her, and sometimes they seem to be hiding behind the termite mound stack of tapes. But they're there, and on the soundtrack, they keep screaming. She finds herself stepping forward to try and get a better look at, and inadvertently steps on something on the floor. One of the tapes she knocked over earlier. It crunches like a bug underneath her, and she instinctively says, "Ugh." On the screen, the man and the woman are fighting. This is odd, as they were fighting when Angela first stepped into the boudoir, and it ended with the man punching the woman through a window, both of them turning into a bright smears of white at the moment of the murder. The first time round, this was followed by a badly scarred shot of the man watching a television of a set, as if nothing had happened. Now the same scene's replaying itself, only this time there's no comforting shot of the man watching the man watching TV after the woman plunges to her hazy, static-addled death. "The Twilight Zone," says Miss Ruth wearily, her voice carrying perfectly on the swell of tortured string music that sweeps across the screen. 1964. Surprisingly, it's horror who responds to this. Occasionally, horror's pop culture knowledge will surprise you. Occasionally, she'll even show an acute and inexplicable knowledge of stock markets and marketing strategies, especially when drunk. "Is this the one with the TV set that can show the future?" asks Horror. "Aha! That would explain it. Man gets precognitive television. Man sees himself kill wife. Man tries to avoid killing wife. Man and wife get into an argument as a result. Man ends up killing wife, exactly as predicted. Perfect self-fulfilling prophecy, bordering on the paradoxical. The faction would be mildly entertained, possibly. Except that... Doesn't seem very fair, says an Angela. "It isn't," says the vast, disembodied, and eminently upper-class voice of Miss Ruth. You can tell she's talking down her nose, as if she's appalled at the notion of having to explain something so simple, but at least it suggests she's got a nose. No discipline, no sense of moral justice, utter chaos. Meaning, and Angela supposes, that the writers were getting desperate for ideas and had run out of dramatic irony, but that explanation smacks of the pit. "Yeah," Horror says slowly. "Do you ever watch anything in color?" "In company?" says Miss Ruth, leaving an Angela in no doubt that a major breach in etiquette has been suggested. "Do you have any idea how much discipline it requires to appreciate color?" Which in Angela takes to mean, if you saw the full horror in color here outside the pit, then you'd go perfectly mad. 2.20. What's in the box? The black man's hand is in the container. How did he get to be this black? The car is still accelerating. Probably. The bass noise is still shaking against Valentine's ribcage, and his pulse is beyond the abnormal, but even his pulse seems far away. The container is open. Red uranium is in the air. How did he get this black? Does anybody know? The black man's hand slides into the container, up to the knuckles, up to the wrist, up to the forearm, but Valentine has no way of judging how quickly the man's moving. His time perception isn't what it should be, and he has difficulty matching the movements to the rhythm of the music. His eyes are watering. Does radiation make your eyes water, or does it just eat them away? Oh, he shouldn't have thought that. Now he's seeing spots in front of his eyes. You can see the nerves tightening along the length of the black man's arms, just under the cuff of his elegant grave robber's jacket. God, he's tightening his grip. He's holding it. Is he going to take it out? Please don't take it out. You can't see it, but you can imagine it. What strikes Valentine is that there's no hiss. He was expecting a hiss, the sound of burning flesh as the man grips the material in the container and lets it torch its chemical name into his skin. There's no hiss. There doesn't need to be. The reputation of red uranium does all the work. It's silent, it's invisible, and it may very well be eating its way into Valentine's cells at this very moment. He's half aware of the smile hovering nearby, the rare smell of something like dried leaves on the man's breath, but more importantly, how did he get this black? Has he done this before? Is the red uranium inside him already, burning his tissue from the inside? Has he really made a deal with it, Bizongu style, and if so, is he one of the walking dead already? 2.21. Breathe. Now the man's pulling that hand out of the container, and only now he really, really needs to gasp, does Valentine realize he hasn't been breathing for some time. The moment of panic passes when the hand comes out of the container empty, leaving the uranium inside, which is at least something. What he feels now can't accurately be called relief, but even so, the blood starts to relax in his bloodstream, and his head starts to swim in a way that's not wholly unpleasant. The man leans back into the seat, flexing his empty right hand. He stretches one leg as he reclines, and almost by accident, his foot pushes the canister forward, making it scrape across the floor of the car. It moves 1 inch towards Valentine. Valentine, already pressed into the animal hide couch, is incapable of moving 1 inch back. "You try," says the man. 2.22. The waiting room, again. The mannequin woman is approaching across the lush white carpet, her hips bobbing side to side under her tight skirt so precisely that even Tiffany, whose hips are renowned for this sort of thing, has difficulty believing the precision. She's seen women in this kind of costume before, prim and self-sculpted, and usually standing at the door of almost fetish clubs, but they're all faking it. The mannequin woman is frightening by comparison. She's bringing over a tray of food. It's something Tiffany finds relaxing, reassuring, especially considering the taxi ride here. She could almost believe that the pasta trail in the streets was leading her here, to this waiting room, with its black drapes and sofas, and its pleasures, and its pleasing, faraway TV sounds. Of course, she can't help get the feeling that the instinct which brought her here goes much deeper. She wonders whether one of her imaginary doppelgangers once came here, and somehow the information's ended up leaking into this version of herself. The mannequin woman doesn't even make eye contact as she offers one of the little black bowls to Tiffany, full of farfalle and tomato shrapnel in its slick, smooth oil. Tiffany does her special, grateful smile, though it might be well out of place here. I was just wondering," she says. Will I be waiting long?" "Not long," says the woman, who is, Tiffany's sure, some kind of CGI image or something. Then she turns and bobbles away, like a skittle with joints. So, Tiffany tries a forkful of the food. It's cool and rich, and there's the slight hind scent of sliced pepper, and whatever's in the tomato makes it seem sweet at the same time, so it takes a while to realize that there's something bitter in it. It's not even an aftertaste, more like something sharp and deliberate, a knife in the dark. The mannequin did ask her whether she wanted, what was it, some kind of sauce? Tiffany just said yes, just as a guess. She screws up her face and looks up to see the woman about to vanish behind 2 of the curtains. "It's, kinda sour," she says. "It doesn't come from the pit," the mannequin woman informs her, as the mechanical backside disappears from view. Tiffany is sure she should give a one-word response to this, but she can't choose between, "Oh, right," or, "Uh-huh." She takes another bite of the food. 2.23. I am John's one true self. It's a simple, direct demonstration, which is why Tiffany finds it so easy to remember. It's the way the facts of life were taught to her by the executive, but note the way it's phrased. They say that in the course of 7 years, every cell of flesh and blood and gristle and brain in your body gets replaced. One cell dies out, ready for a new cell to slip in exactly the same position. Flesh and blood and gristle and brain. Nothing about bone. Bone knows how to stay. Once your other cells have dropped away and your body stopped replacing itself with ingenious copies, the chances are that your bones will still be there. They can last for millions of years, your bones. So what does it mean? The fact that alone of all your parts, your skeleton is the one thing that remains loyal? Does it mean that you are your skeleton? Everything else is so temporary. If you want to believe there's a real you, then believe that it's a tough, mindless, and bright as calcium. Imagine the argument, for example, between Valentine's brain and his bones. "Get out of the car now," says the brain. "We're going to die." "Humph," says the bone. "Well, I am a lot less bothered by radiation poisoning than you seem to be, so I think we'll be staying." What marks out the real faction paradox, according to the popular lore? Answer: its masks are real bone. Bone from something old and impossible. The public knows the bone can't lie. That it isn't transient like so many other fashions. The real faction paradox, if it were to exist, would make a claim to the title not because of its knowledge, which changes over time, just like we all do, or its membership, doubly so, but because of its masks, its irreplaceable masks. There used to be cultures that used bones as weapons. The pointing bones of the Australian Aboriginals aimed like a gun to cause brain death in any victim capable of understanding. Or certain Polynesian tribes who knew something of the nature of time even before the learned gentlemen of the West, and, just like the faction, made that direct link between the bones of the past and the past itself. By the way, Valentine's bones are winning the argument. He's staying put. 2.24. Oh, and the shocking truth about Angela's faction paradox mask is this. She bought it from a shop called Temptation, which just happens to be a street or two away from the square where the rocket attack hit home. Assuming it's still there, Temptation is a shop that sells fetish wear. It makes a big thing out of being a postmodern, post-feminist sex shop, which means that every single item it sells walks the fine line between pornography and sarcasm. Faction paradox masks aren't technically erotica, at least not yet, but there's obviously enough fetishism there for it to qualify. There were 2 other girls in the shop when Angela bought the mask, both of them clearly 17, and under the impression they'd entered forbidden territory. Several hundred years earlier, they would have proved themselves by getting pierced, but now, looking at piercings is enough. One of the girls was immensely fat, and had squeezed her huge, rubbery body into a tiny dress, while her pale, skinny friend looked on and pretended to be embarrassed. And, of course, the girl couldn't resist it. Standing there in front of the shop's only mirror, she scooped a faction mask off the rack and tried it on, giggling all the time. She looked like an animal, like something leathery, well-fed and huge-eyed, balancing on a pair of high-heeled black hooves. For just a moment, Angela caught a glimpse of what she might look like, or what she might have looked like if she weren't so impeccably well turned out. A hybrid animal woman, overfed and overcultured. By that time, however, she'd already paid for her own mask, and there was no turning back. There was no sexual fetish for faction paradox, or for ersatz voodoo-faced animal people. But there will be. Girls with their spectacular hooves will stalk the streets of the towns, and boys on the edge of puberty will see them and be curious, and never forget that sense of hormonal animal curiosity. And then they'll grow up and they won't be able to remember the sensation of being young and feeling the whiplash of puberty without remembering that every mystery animal, every beautiful and exotic creature they ever knew, used to hide behind a big-eyed, snouted skull. 2.25. Tribute. Tribute. It's hard to resist taking a step forward towards Miss Ruth, even if you know that it's not in any way necessary. If you've got something to give her, Jacqueline will magically teleport it from your hand to her patron's throne. The pit's habits die hard, though, so when Angela puts her hand into the lining of her skirt and removes the naked, unmarked video cassette that's been nesting there ever since she took off her coat, she automatically stumbles forward to offer it up to the Great Mother, offering the tribute for the Oracle's inspection. Nobody has ever successfully worked out what Miss Ruth considers a good sacrifice, and what she considers a bad one. No reliable report has ever described her rejecting an offering of a raw videotape, though urban lore no doubts insists that a terrible fate has befallen those who've attempted to offer her DVDs. But in the past, she must have been presented with everything from home movies to feature films, straight off the remaindered shelves. She keeps her own opinions. And Angela presents Miss Ruth with a videotape recording made from Angela's own, not wholly legal, satellite feed. It started out as a recording of the memorial service of a dead general, taped by mistake from a rolling news channel, but a transmission from a pirate station cut in halfway and started overlaying it with Brazilian fetish porn, filling most of the screens with quivering waves of yellow-skinned, badly tuned flesh, which is entertaining only because by sheer fluke, the soundtrack, the regular rhythmic sounding of the cannon as the general receives his last salute, still appears to be in perfect sync with the imagery. One boom for every 4 thrusts. You could easily fake something like this, but that's not the point. The strange marriage of the pornographic and the funerary was a rare and natural event, and the chances that it'll ever happen again in the entire history of human culture. And the chances are it'll never happen again in the entire history of human culture. And Angela doesn't expect Miss Ruth to care about either porn or dead generals any more than she does. But she feels that the mother of all broadcast media will at least understand its unique nature. It's said that many of the videotapes in Miss Ruth's collection are identical to the casual observer, that in some sections there are 10 or 11 or 56 cassettes which all contain exactly the same program, but recorded at different times or in different parts of the world. Only Miss Ruth sees this difference. This is clearly a woman who appreciates context. And it's not as if Angela really has to make an impression with this gift. She's not after any favors here. She's offering a mere courtesy, since it's rude to come to the tower empty-handed. 2.26. There's something you should know, Angela announces, and the sound from Miss Ruth's viewing chair might possibly be a sigh. Yes, says Miss Ruth, somewhat wearily. We're doing a ritual, Angela explains, realizing how weak it sounds even as she says it. She's doing a ritual, adds Horror. A ritual, repeats Miss Ruth dryly, although she stops short of saying, how nice for you. Evidently this news from the pit is of no importance to her at all. And Angela nods. To wake it up. The town. To wake up the town. I thought we should tell you. And, of course, it's only you who's doing this, says Miss Ruth, her voice so nasal that it gets right inside Angela's own sinuses. You deciding this town needs waking. You're not a part of this society you're so intent on rousing? The word town sounds as if it's completely alien to Miss Ruth, even taking the sarcasm into account. Unlike Angela, Miss Ruth really can make a claim to be beyond this society. Well, Yes. Well, yes? Is the best that an Angela can manage? And you're certain, I suppose, that you're the important one in this ritual? Someone's got to be, and Angela retorts. Says Mithras. Suddenly, Angela becomes aware of Jacqueline, standing right at her side again, bound up in the apprentice uniform with its dagger blade high heels planted squarely in the floor. Given the flicker, Jacqueline looks for all the world like a maid from a What the Butler Saw movie, as retro as it gets. What Miss Ruth means is she appreciates the warning, says Jacqueline. 2.27. The process. The mouth of the container is a great black poisonous hole, so forgive Valentine if he can't take his eyes off it. From here on the couch, with his spine forced into the upholstery, he might possibly be able to see the material inside if he leaned forward, and if the lighting happened to be better. But the car is moving faster, and faster, and faster still, so even Valentine, distracted as he may be by imminent radiation poisoning, has to wonder where in the town you can find a road so long and so free of any other traffic. You want to use it? Says the black man. Then use it. Valentine tries to shake his head. No, he imagines himself saying. No, you're a scary witch doctor, man, and not a scientist, and you don't understand. I need a special suit. I need special gloves. You don't need anything, the man tells him. Telepathy? No, easy guess. You just gotta know it. Just gotta introduce yourself. He laughs then. His vocal cords sound like been scraped by razors. Is that a side effect of the radiation too? Can't, says Valentine, thinking, is this a game of Russian roulette? Does the radiation only kill you 50% of the time? But the black man just stares at him. And smiles, of course. Don't forget that. Can't do it, Valentine explains, but his voice gets swept up in the thum of the sound system. And let's be honest, it's not a great explanation anyways. Said you had things to do, says the black man. Can't have much that needs doing, even if you can't even get to know it. What's Valentine going to do? Back out now that he's come this far? Tell his partners that he folded at the last minute, kick down the door and jump out of the black carriage as it tears along this infinitely long stretch of roadway? No. Even if those are technically the most reasonable options, certainly more reasonable than putting your hand into a tube of uranium, he's part of a process now. His hand pauses, though, when it reaches the lip of the container. It's giving him time to think. Not to turn back, but time to realize what's happening to him. Time, too, to look up from the pale night... To look up... Yes. Time, too, to look up from the pale night person skin of his arm and stare at the black man right in the face, if not precisely in the eye. But the black man barely has a face at all. Just a smile that never goes away, and occasional scars of yellow as the candle streetlight flashes across his face and illuminates his features one angle at a time. The bass rolls like thunder. Every Bazongu in Africa speaks through the ha-hat. The hi-hat. Valentine spreads the fingers of his hand and lets his fingers slide over the lip of the container, and 2.28. The car slams to a halt. Valentine, hunched over the canister, is thrown back against the couch, with his neck almost snapping on the bone of the headrest. Given that he's already half expecting a big bang or a nuclear shock, is there really such thing as a nuclear shock? From the RU-235, the impact's enough to give a near-death experience to every sense he has. The shock makes its way down his spine, lighting up most of his nerves on its way and setting fire to the tiny little fragments of cause drugs that are still clogging up his bloodstream. You could almost believe that the black man timed this, and to perfection. Valentine spends a moment or two blinking away the dots in his eyes, and a moment or two staring at the man before he thinks to look down at the floor. The red uranium canister is on its side. It's rolling to and fro while the floor shudders underneath it, but you can tell there's something heavy inside because it never rolls too far too far right or to the left. Valentine tries to feel something at this point, even just the prickle skin of oncoming cancer, but he feels nothing. Lying on its side, the container looks like a wounded animal. No, like a dead shark. A fish out of water. Its big black mouth gapes helplessly at Valentine's feet, trying to look threatening but lacking most of its dignity. "See," says the black man, "it's not so bad." Valentine looks up, and out of the window. There are lights out there. Ordinary street lights, although the glass is too dark to make out much more. "Where are we?" he asks, not unreasonably. The black man doesn't answer. Valentine watches him out of the corner of one eye, just to make sure he isn't making any important hand gestures. He's not. "Are we still in town?" Valentine tries. 2.29. The Land of the Dead. Imagine this single image. With an open car door as its frame. Imagine it as a painting, or better yet, as a TV picture. One discreetly framed moment from the life of the outside world. It's an archway, or an overpass. That's more like it. The underside of an overpass. Somewhere up ahead, there's a grey concrete wall, marked with generations of graffiti, too inbred and too obscure to mean much. There are two great monolithic concrete columns holding up the arch between the car and the wall and supporting the road that's most surely run overhead. But there's no traffic noise from above. Yes, this image has its own soundtrack. Or on the road that runs through the archway. Why no traffic? Are cars afraid to come here? Perhaps they're afraid of the things that live under the overpass, the things that lurk under the bridge. They're here now. There must be 7 of them. Some standing close to the car, some lounging against the concrete pillars, some camouflaged against the black paint graffiti patterns. The street lamps give you enough light to let you count them, but not enough to give them faces. All of them dress in clothes of the young and the predatory. Jackets with hoods and designer names scratched across their chest, caps that hide their eyes, shoes made for running and proving you've got the will to run. Some things aren't so conventional, though. The hair's too long, too carefully styled to make them look altogether modern. There are braids and beads. There's pieces of jewellery which, in most towns, would never be worn by anything male, and here they're all male. And all of them turn to face us. All of them turn to look toward the car as it opens. There's no movement, apart from the turning of their heads. There's no facial expressions any more than there are individual faces. All of them are black, just like the man himself. A black that's got at least as much to do with allegiance as with race. Because you can only get here if you know the Bizongu. You can only get this far if you've reached out to touch the primal poison. See, there's something on the ground between them. Did you think they were just standing around? Look more closely. They're standing around something. Something that's etched into the paving slabs, almost at the dead center of the tableau. They're looking as if we've disturbed them, as if this isn't meant for our eyes. The pattern on the ground is an outline drawn in chalk, human in shape, the same white line that's traditionally drawn around the body of a murder scene, except that this one seems more stylized. The arms and legs are severed from the body, each limb in a discrete, self-enclosed shape. It's the mark of the dead, which seems apt. These people, gathered under the bridge, are they the dead too? Easy to imagine that they've touched one of the Bizongu, one of the hot spirits in the radioactive form or otherwise. Everything said here is said on the walls, not on their faces. Did they touch something truly poisonous, to make their eyes so invisible and their lives so silent? This is the land of the dead, where all the black carriages go. The door closes, and as it closes, the dead men lose interest. The last thing we see, as the tinted window shut out the light, is the 7 figures turning their heads away from us again. 2.30. Next. There's someone else in the waiting room when Angela and Horror are led back through it, folded up on one of the plush, padded, reassuring sofas right next to Angela's coat. The girl looks about 20, probably quite pretty and thin, but messed up looking. Big eyes surrounded by sweat and mascara. Arms wrapped around her knees, staring up at Angela as if she's waiting for someone to attack her. She looks like the kind of girl who isn't dedicated enough to become a prostitute and has sex with men just to get lifts home. Angela wonders whether the girl's been given on a bad trip and thinks Miss Ruth's some kind of drug dealer. When they reach the lift, Horror leans over to Angela and mutters something. She mutters it through gritted teeth, as if that'd be enough to stop anyone else hearing it. What she mutters is this: That looks just like Tiffany Courter. Horror says it the very instant the lift doors start to close, giving Angela just enough time to glance over at the girl with the sweat-soaked hair and the leather pants, who's next in line to see Miss Ruth. However, Angela utterly fails to do this. Instead, she just says, "Don't be stupid, Horror." The lift doors close, going down. 2.31. The truth about Foxy. At this precise moment in time, the Sun's all-purpose show business correspondent, columnist, and bear-baiter Gareth Foxy Taylor is in bar 16 corners away from Kamikaze Lane. The bar's technically closed for the night, but Foxy, because he likes to pretend the world knows him as Foxy, claiming that people cheerfully address him as such in the street every day, knows someone who knows the owner. He's not only finishing his drink, he's also finishing a cold orecchiette and feta cheese takeaway from a plastic carton, and he's reading other people's columns in other people's newspapers while he eats. This is how the world should best remember him. Newsprint and the lingering smell of garlic. He's already written his piece on the second Tiffany Courter performance. Actually, he wrote it before the performance, which he didn't bother to attend. No, wait. See how he's painted here? In grease gray and takeaway yellow? He's a sneering, leering hack who makes opinions without knowing any of the facts. Let's keep one thing in mind, though. He makes his assumption days in advance, but 19 times out of 20, he turns out to be right, and the other 1 time out of 20, he's not really interested. This is a complex society. The culture in general would rip out every little cell in our brains if we couldn't assume, generalize, and pigeonhole. We can't afford to know all the details. See this man, Gareth Foxy Taylor. This chubby, gargoyle-mouth, bristle-faced creature of the night. We have a perfect right to hate him, but only in the same way that he has a perfect right to hate Tiffany, or any other overhyped prima donna who pounces across the television screen. We have a right to hate him, not because he's ugly, loudmouthed, and bigoted. He has a neat line in attacking anyone slightly more liberal than Oswald Mosley, because he knows full well it'll get him invited onto a TV show as a controversial media pundit, and Christ, he gets paid. No, we have a right to hate him because he's banal. He's already thinking about the day after tomorrow's news. He doesn't know that before all the night's rituals are done, something will happen which will make his column on the size of Tiffany Courter's calves almost unpublishable. What would you like to bet he'll be there when it happens? Odds on him living through it, anyone? 2.32. Valentine's question was never really answered. Are we still in this town? He asked. But that was before the black man opened the car door and showed him the world outside. The scene under the overpass, with the dead men and the chalk line on the pavement, didn't seem familiar. Which is to say, it wasn't part of the town Valentine knows. But even on the night shift, he hasn't visited every part of the town. Nevertheless, he finds himself thinking of the not quite true and not quite false answers he gave to the black man. when the man wanted to know whether he was planning on using the red uranium inside the town limits. It's not going to be used in anywhere like this. The land of the dead wasn't anywhere like this anywhere else either. God. The land of the dead wasn't anywhere like anywhere else either. That sense, that creeping thought. You can only get to this place if you've touched the hot spirits. Maybe it intersects the town in a way that's impossible to chart on an ordinary A to Z. Just like the war itself, or one of Valentine's all-important ships of war. Right now, the black carriage is on the road again, the streetlights sliding past the windows, the music settling down into a constant, lazy pulse. The black man is taking him home. The red uranium container, with its cap now fixed in position, lounges on the seat by its side, no longer a threat. "You said there's only half in there," Valentine said, not taking his eyes off the window. He's surprised how flat and disinterested his voice sounds. Maybe because his pills are blissing him out a little. Maybe it's the background radiation, who can say? "Uh-huh," the black man confirms. "Where's the other half?" "Where do you live?" Valentine glances at the man, but he hasn't moved a muscle, so he turns back to the window. The man's smile has now become the smile of a narcotics dealer who's telling a new client, "See how it feels?" "Why do you want to know where I live?" he asks. "We deliver," says the black man, his idea of a joke. Valentine shakes his head. "No, I don't want... I need it there. I need to get back to the ambulance." "Oh, you're gonna do what you do in the ambulance, huh?" Valentine shrugs. He knows the man isn't expecting a proper answer. "There's something I need there," he says. "And who knows? By now the girl in the mask might be one of the dead, too." "What you like," says the black man. "So the other half?" "We'll get it to you." Oh, if the smile could get any bigger, it would. "You can trust me, brother." 2.33. How the world sees it. What does a ship look like? No, that's a dead-end question. Like asking what real angles look like, or what color Thursday is. Everybody secretly knows that the days of the week are color-coded. For now, we'll take it as read that this town, Thursday, that in this town, Thursday is generally considered to be yellow. With the ships of the war, the question's doubly difficult, since the vast majority of people don't believe in them any more than they believe in the straw that broke the camel's back, or the cat who got the cream. If asked, most people would probably draw something like a jet fighter. It has to be sleek, because it's built by the noble engineers of the wartime powers, and it has to be black, because anything else would lose the air of invisibility. A black triangle, flat and fast-moving, something shark-like, in fact, incapable of stopping. Those particularly imaginative types who put great store in the shipbuilder's technical abilities might tend to run with the shark feel, but go for something more organic. A craft that's vast, cool, and unsympathetic. A grand predator in every conceivable way. Such a ship would have veins full of nuclear tissue and 100 fission-bright rocket-loaded eyes, with its wings sweeping back and curving in on themselves, arcs a mile long, turning its rear section into something sharp and self-enclosed, like the beak on a giant squid. A ship that doesn't care about invisibility. It knows it can go where it pleases, and witnesses will simply be burned off the skin of the world. Those who catch sight of this monstrosity burst into flames without explanation, and evaporate into thin air, never leaving any footprints behind. 2.34. How Valentine sees it. Valentine thinks he knows better. Valentine understands that if those who run the war are honestly capable of fighting battles which extend onto the future, and if their technology does indeed involve time in some way, then the ships can't possibly just be flying gunboats or military transports with their own will to exist. The ships must logically be extensions of history itself, living footnotes in the textbook of the war. He imagines them as structures extending through time, intersecting towns like this one in ways that poor dumb parochials, more slang for civilians, can't quite grasp. But human beings aren't made to think in abstracts. Though he might willingly explain this concept to anyone who asks, it's not what he really believes. Note the way he thinks of a ship as a living footnote. Whenever he says the word ship, he sees it in his head, huge, slippery, and murderous, every bit as organic as those who subscribe to the shark model. This being a beast of the imagination, it'll never fit inside his head all at once, and he'll never get it down on paper any more than you can describe the real horror of a genuine nightmare or of sleep paralysis. So what if it's supposed to be made of history? Valentine's imagines its roots and feelers planting themselves in the ground, even though he knows better. He imagines a once human pilot in its control section, so heavily wired into the machine systems that he or she becomes almost insect-like, sealed into a carapace of black armor, and linked into the control mechanisms by cables and caterpillar wires. Being human, Valentine's being raised to think in terms of space, not theory. While Angela maps out her ritual, and Tiffany tries to map out the culture in general, Valentine puts together the map of the thing that's buried under the earth, wondering where its branches might lead him, and where it might sprout from the ground again. 2.35. The hall, again. Horror may fucking hate this place, but for Tiffany, it goes a long, long way beyond that. The hallway connects the waiting room to the place where, if she understands this correctly, she'll meet Miss Ruth. This much makes sense. She may be on foot, but it's much like waiting for a taxi to get her to a new scene. What she doesn't understand is how this place, this in-between place, can be such an atrocity. It horrifies her. The real problem isn't the spectacle of the 100,000 chitinous black shell cassettes, or the stone things with the blunt, chipped-away faces that guard them, or the way the room seems to lurch in time to the distant, distorted, and no longer reassuring TV noise from the far end. The real problem is that this in-between place is such a terrible place in itself. For one of the famous and teleported like Tiffany, this is a new and profound kind of horror. For the first time in recent memory, she feels expectation. She realizes, with a terrible, fast-building dread, that what's waiting for her at the far end of this hallway must be even worse. And it occurs to her, then, that perhaps she's never going to get anywhere, that now she's started moving of her own volition, without the executive to guide her, she'll never be able to set a location ever again. She may find herself traveling forever through places that get worse and worse, and with the pulling back of every curtain. All of a sudden, this all-too-sensitive, just-about-educated girl, who's never known any anxiety more serious than the width of her hips, knows infinity. She's trying to get the mannequin automaton woman, to stop moving, because she can't stop following that bobbing, mechanically precise body, even though her legs are buckling under her and she's lurching towards one of the sets of the bookcases. She knows she can only stop if the mannequin stops, but the woman doesn't even look back at her, and the jagged edges of the hard, black cassettes loom out from the shelves as she stumbles toward them. She realizes there was probably something in the food she was given, the thing that cut across her tongue. "Stop," says Tiffany Cortez cum Corta, and she veers away from the tapes, finds herself lurching forward again. "Please stop." The mannequin stops, but only because she's reached the end of the hallway. The curtains snap open, pulled apart with one clean, cybernetic gesture, and Tiffany sees what's on the other side and starts screaming. and it doesn't occur to her for a second that she's just repeating the scream that she's just repeating the scream she has to do during every performance at the end of Hypnotized by You. I'm going to take a moment to drink. I'm probably going to run to grab a snack. We're... I'd normally say we're back at this point, but I've just realized that the stream itself has been going for about 3 hours, which is the usual amount we do. Admittedly, my voice is getting a bit sore, or my throat is getting a bit raw, so we're going to call it a night, right there, at the Scream of Tiffany Corta. I think that's a good place to, end it off. Thank you for coming to join me in the dark corners of the earth. This has been Tom Mordred's Midnight Radio.